Chapter 28 of The Clue of the New Pin by Edgar Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. The Clue of the New Pin. Chapter 28. There came to police headquarters a tall, ruddy-skinned man of middle age. He wore a suit which was evidently not made for him, and he seemed a little depressed by his surroundings. "I have an appointment with Inspector Carver," he said, and passed a letter across the desk to the police clerk, who read it and nodded. "Inspector Carver is expecting you," he said, and called a messenger. Carver looked round as the door opened and viewed his caller with a speculative eye. Then he jumped up. "Of course," he said. "Sit down, please." "I hope," began the man, "there isn't going to be any trouble." "Not for you," said Carver, "but I rather fancy there is trouble coming for somebody." The messenger closed the door and left them together. Half an hour later, Inspector Carver telephoned for the office stenographer, and when the harassed man with a fresh face and ill-fitting clothes left the police office after a 3-hour examination, Inspector Carver had material for much cogitation. Tabb called in the ordinary way of duty, and they discussed the latest tragedy, but never once did Inspector Carver make reference to his visitor of the morning. That was his secret, and too precious a one in the circumstances to breathe to a soul. He drove that afternoon to the detention prison where Walters was waiting trial, and had a long talk with him. Yearling was in his parlour halfway through his long weekly letter to his son when Inspector Carver was announced. He put down his brush and gazed impassively upon the servant who had brought in the inspector's card. "Is this man alone?" he asked. "Yes, Yearling. There is no man with him." Yearling tapped his white teeth with his well-manicured nails. "Come," he said laconically, and there was something in Carver's face which told Yearling all that he wanted to know. But there was a fight to be made yet, and he was not without hope that this matter of the Trasmere murder and the tragedy that had followed would be settled in a manner more consonant with his keen sense of obligation. The inspector did not come to the point at once. He accepted a cigar that the Chinaman offered to him, spoke jocularly of Yearling's letter-writing, asked a question or two about Ursula Artfern, and at last hinted at the object of his visit. "Yearling," he said, "I think the Trasmere case is coming to a solution." Yearling's eyelids did not so much as flicker. "In fact," said the inspector, carefully examining the ash of his cigar, "I found the murderer." Yearling said nothing. "I need very little confirmatory evidence to put the man who killed Jessie Trasmere on the trap," Carver went on. "And you have come to me to furnish that evidence?" said Yearling with a touch of irony. Carver shook his head and smiled. "I don't know. I didn't think you would," he said, and then almost sharply, "Where are the documents you took from the Trasmere house the night you went there with Miss Artfern?" The Chinaman got up without hesitation, unlocked a small safe in the corner of the room, and brought out a thick packet of papers. "They are all there?" asked Carver, shooting a suspicious glance at the other. "All except 2, was the cool reply. "One of which has reference to my interest in the Golden Roof, and that is with my lawyer." "And the other?" asked the detective. "That deals with matters of a sacred nature," said Yearling in that precise English that sounded almost affected. Carver bit his lip. "You know that this is the document I particularly want?" he asked. "I guess that," was the reply. "Nevertheless, Mr. Carver, I cannot give it to you. And if you know so much—" for a second a ghost of a smile lit his brown eyes, "then you will know why it is not forthcoming." "Does Miss Artfern know?" Yearling shook his head. "She is the one person who must not know," he said emphatically. "If it were not for her—" he shrugged his shoulders. "You might see it." Carver knew that he was opposed by a greater will than his own, and that neither threats nor promises would move this impassive man from the attitude he had taken up. "What does it matter whether you see this paper or not?" asked Yearling. "You say you know the murderer, that you have sufficient evidence to put him on the trap. But have you?" His look was a challenge. "You cannot convict a man on supposition, Mr. Carver. You must prove beyond any doubt whatever that Jessie Trasmere was killed by somebody who had the means of getting in and out that locked vault and leaving the key on the table. It is not enough to say, 'I am certain that this prisoner killed his benefactor.' It's not sufficient that you can show motives. You must produce the means. Until you can say the murderer obtained admission to the vault by this or that door in this or that way, or that he employed these or those methods to restore the key to the table from the outside of a locked door through which no key could pass, you cannot secure a conviction. That is the law. I studied law at Harvard, and I have the rules of evidence at my fingertips." He smiled faintly. You see, Mr. Carver, that the confirmatory evidence you require cannot possibly be supplied by me. Carver knew that he was speaking no more than the truth, that he was against a dead wall unless some human eye had witnessed the murder and the method by which the murderer escaped. The logic of the Chinaman's criticism was irresistible, and Carver, who had seen success within reach, experienced a sense of failure at the very moment when he thought that all his efforts were coming to a fruition. "Then tell me this," he said. "I understand that on several occasions you have been followed by this man in black. Have you any idea who he is?" "Yes," said the other without hesitation. "But what is the value of my ideas? I could not swear to any facts. And facts are the meat and drink of juries, Mr. Carver." Carver got up and sighed heavily, and hearing him, Yearling broke into a fit of silent laughter. "I'm sorry," he apologized, "but I'm thinking of my favorite poem." His eyes twinkled. "You remember the other gentleman who rose with a sigh and he said, 'Can this be? We are ruined by Chinese cheap labor.'" "I shall certainly not go to the heathen Chinese," said Carver good-humoredly. "Not for the moment. What I like about you, Yearling, is your refreshing sanity. I don't know that I have ever dealt with a man, shall I say fought with a man, who would have given me greater pleasure to fence." The Chinaman performed a deep kowtow, and his mock humility amused Carver long after he had left the shadow of the golden roof. Yearling, who seldom made any personal effort for the comfort of his guests, paid particular attention to the preparations which were being made in Number 6 that night. The Italian waiters, to whom the proprietor was almost unknown, were both nervous and annoyed, for nothing seemed to please Yearling. He had the flowers changed half a dozen times. He had new clothes brought, and at the last minute insisted upon the table being laid all over again. He brought the rarest of glass to adorn the board, unearthed unsuspected treasures in chinaware, and substituted them for the crockery of the restaurant. This done, he summoned to his room the maître d'hôtel and the wine chef, and chose the dinner with the most exquisite care. "Yearling has really done himself proud," said Tab, admiring the table. The girl nodded. She had hoped that Yearling would have chosen another room, but she had no real feeling of repugnance, and besides, she had been here since Trasmia's death. "It is very thrilling to be dining alone with a young man," she said, handing a wrap to the waiter, "and I can only hope the scandal of it doesn't get into the newspapers." "Shall we see Yearling?" asked Tab halfway through the dinner. She shook her head. "He never appears. He has only been in this room twice to my recollection." "It is our first appearance together in public," said Tab solemnly. "I can count on our boys, but if any of those Herald thugs hear and catch a glimpse of your expensive ring, there are going to be scare lines in that deplorable rack. The Herald has no reticence on decency." She laughed softly and looked at the expensive ring that glittered and sparkled in the light of the shaded lamp. "I asked Carver if he would come along after dinner," said Tab, "but he is busy. He sent the most flowery and poetical messages to you. Really, Carver is a surprising person. There is a whole world of romance hidden behind that somewhat unpleasing exterior, if you will pardon the journalese." But if Carver could not come, they had a visitor. There came a tap, and the door opened slowly. "Great Moses!" said Tab, springing up. "How the dickens did you know that we were here, Rex?" "I spotted you," said Rex Lander reproachfully, slinking in at the side door like two guilty souls. "May I offer my congratulations, Miss Artford, and lay at your feet the fragments of a broken heart?" She laughed nervously at his jest. "No, I can't stay," said Rex. "I have a party, and moreover I am entertaining a man with terrific ideas in architecture. Isn't that queer, now that I am no longer arcing? I have conceived a passion for that unhallowed profession. Even old Stott is becoming an admirable personage in my eyes. Have you forgiven me, Miss Artford?" "Oh, yes," she said quietly. "I have forgiven you a very long time ago." Rex's baby eyes were very kindly. His plump face was wrinkled in a smile of amiable reflection. When a young man's fancy, he began and caught a reflection in the mirror. From where Tab and the girl sat, they could see nothing. Rex saw reflected the half-open door and a figure that stood motionless outside. He spun round with an exclamation. The end of chapter 28.